Hello, folks. You can stop laughing now. I'm really going to show you how I buy worms and build a home for them to eat, sleep, multiply, and poop worm castings in return for their keeping. Yep, free expensive worm castings for eating your table scraps. I'll explain more as we go. Let's get started. Keeping worms can be a minimal expenditure, or a bit more than that as I have done. But you may already have what is required to get started. You will need something to hold the bedding where the worms will live. I am using a couple of totes from a big box store, but you could use a couple of 5-gallon buckets or something similar. You can follow my example and modify it to fit your budget. I started by drilling holes in the bottom for drainage. I'm using a 1/4 inch bit and drilling the holes about 2 inches apart around the perimeter. Next, I drilled some air holes around the rim of the container. I'm using the same 1/4 inch frill bit and drill the holes about 3 inches apart. My worms will live outside. That is why I'm drilling the holes in the side of the container instead of the top. That way the worm bedding won't get flooded when it rains. Keeping the moisture at the correct level is important. It should be the consistency of a wringed out sponge. Next, we'll need some bedding for which the worms will live. I use mostly corrugated board from Amazon's shipping cartons and some newspaper. Don't use any glossy paper or paper that has had a glossy coating applied. You can tear it up by hand or use an Amazon Basic 12-page shredder like I'm using here. I'll leave a link to the paper shredder in the description area below. You'll need enough corrugated board and newsprint to make a depth of about 4 inches. Soak it in water for a couple of hours. Then wring it out, place it in the tub with the holes in the bottom. You should also make more bedding for use later as the worms eat the bedding. Yep, they will eat the paper also. While George is shredding paper, let's discuss what we expect in return for our efforts and expenses. A pound of red wrigglers will produce about half their body weight each day. So if you have a pound of mature worms, you could expect about 1/2 pound of worm castings per day. But you should wait and harvest castings about every 30 days. So it should be possible to get maybe 15 pounds of castings per month, except when it is too hot or too cold, etc. Another chore will be harvesting cocoons from the castings. If you have an interest in increasing your herd, you'll need to pick out the cocoons and put them in a small nursery container. There are many videos about this on YouTube. I normally shred lots of bedding while I'm at it, so I don't have to get the machine out again. You'll covering up table scraps with fresh bedding most of the time. I cover the table scraps with fresh bedding to help keep it from attracting unwanted flies and fruit flies. I have 1 full tote of bedding extra. We'll see how long that lasts. I put about 3 or 4 inches of a mixture of 1/3 cocoa coir or peat moss with 2/3 shredded corrugated board. Put this mixture in your container about a week before you order your worms. That will give it time to settle in and cool off. Sprinkle 2 or 3 handfuls of soil in your tote, which introduces beneficial microorganisms. The soil will provide grit the worms need to grind food in their gizzard. You now need to put something into the bottom of the container that you did not drill holes to keep the other container from bottoming out. You can now put the container in which you drilled holes into the other container. If you put too much water into the bedding, it will drain into the second container. Well, today my worms arrived via UPS and they were in great shape. I ordered from Nature's Good Guys. I'm not an affiliate, but I'll leave a link in the description below. From my studies, red worms are more likely to tolerate the extremes of heat and cold weather that we have here in Texas. The worms were shipped in a box with large holes to supply oxygen to the worms. Our UPS driver was alert enough to know that something live was in the box, So we pick up the floor mat in front of our entry door and place it over the box to supply shade for the worms. Now that's a good guy. Sorry about our wind chimes, it was a windy day. The box also contains several pieces of literature. One was an ad for mason bees and why we should keep them. One a sheet of thanks for the order. Another card explaining the benefits of red worms. A booklet of beneficial insects and a sheet explaining the anatomy of the red worm. Golly, I've got a couple of days of reading now. Good job, nature's good guys. The worms came packed in a cloth bag filled with peat moss. I opened each bag and emptied them in the tote. Don't stir everything up. Just leave the worms on top of the bedding and let them find their way home. The red wrigglers head for the darkness of the bedding. Red wrigglers don't like the sunlight at all. After 20 or 30 minutes, the worms will find their way down into moist shredded paper. I have some birdseed that I pulverize in a blender and put on top with some agricultural limestone in. They will start eating right away, but don't overfeed them in the beginning. One of the worst things for a worm bin is to overfeed. Feed a little more each time you feed until you find the level that they will consume in 2 or 3 days. Red wrigglers will eat almost anything that has been alive. You should avoid milk, cheese, greasy foods, and meat. These items would also attract unwanted guests to the bin. Just putting your red wiggler worms in a tote is not enough. If you are keeping your worms outdoors, you'll need to do something to keep them cool in the summer. The bedding needs to stay under 85 F. I had an old section of fence and salvaged enough wood to make a shelter that will supply shade for 2 totes. Some people keep frozen plastic bottles of water to add to the tote each day. Best of luck if you decide to accept this project. Oh, that sounds like Paladin if you're old enough to remember Paladin. Keep your worms hydrated, but only to the point that you can only squeeze a drop or 2 of water between your fingers. If they dry out, they will die. Red wigglers breathe through their skin and need the moisture to breathe. This video is just meant as a basic starting point. I suggest you search for red wigglers on YouTube or search for other sites with more detailed information. Composting worms should turn up some informative information also. If you have questions, post them in the comments section below, and I'll try my best to answer them. Thanks a bunch for watching my videos. Bye now. See you soon.